Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and I know some of you expected more in space this weekend, and that's still on the way, but breaking news is breaking news. The news being that Hasbro plans to make a follow-up to the 2017 Ranger film, as cited by comicbook.com. While that announcement comes as a major relief for many, me included, it also presents us with a perfect chance to discuss the reimagined film in a bit more depth, as well as discuss potential pathways for improvement going into the second installment. About a year and a half ago, I did a film review on the 2017 movie, giving it a mostly positive review. To avoid spoilers, I didn't talk about much in the way of large plot details beyond my usual brand of narrative-based analysis. My original plan was to do a more detailed follow-up video much sooner than now, but my willingness to make such a video started to fade as hopes of a sequel seemed to diminish by the day. Even though I will be a lot more critical here than in my relatively sparse film review, know that this is one of the happier videos I'll make, if only due to those aforementioned hopes now being restored. For now. So, with all that said, let's jump back into Power Rangers and first discuss a few problematic areas in detail. The slow burn financial tragedy of Power Rangers 2017 is kind of where we need to start. Whether you loved it, couldn't stand it, or haven't seen it yet, it didn't do nearly as well as it should have, and Hollywood is a business first. The simple reason that there's more than one of these abominations is because of money. If Rangers closed with even average Marvel numbers, we would have heard an official sequel announcement by the next day, if not sooner. That was the plan, of course, with the end scene tease for Tommy, but at that point, Saban must have already been in serious talks with Hasbro. Whether or not the movie had much to do with his decision to sell, I can't say, but it probably wasn't encouraging for the old regime. Which begs the question, why didn't Power Rangers do better? This is not an easy, obvious, or one-dimensional question by any means, so I'm just going to attempt to answer it from the perspective of the film's shortcomings versus stuff like marketing dollars. It starts with first impressions. For the most part, the cast didn't have much to do with this because, in line with Ranger tradition, they didn't pick very many high-profile actors. Becky G is by far the most famous among them, but that's more for her music. So, there was never going to be too much talk surrounding how well Dacre would fit into the role of Jason, because not a lot of people could even guess at such an answer. So, what mattered more was the Ranger iconography, the suits, the Zords, the Zordon, things that immediately jump out at you as unmistakably Power Rangers. Unfortunately, that's where some of the problems started. Now, I stand by the idea that the suits look fine in live action, not spectacular, but passable. But at first glance, no. This reimagining would have done well to take more inspiration from Marvel and less from DC. At the end of the day, the suits were far too busy looking, which, ironically enough, is a Hasbro cinematic specialty. The reason Marvel's aesthetic works is because they don't overcomplicate their designs, and in doing so, make each costume iconic, make them look as if the characters jumped right off the comic book page. Even Iron Man, for all the complex inner workings of his suit, is easy on the eyes. The 2017 Rangers did not utilize that same tactic, and as a result, there is a sizable section of people that ended up never buying into them, as the box office numbers show. With the Zords, you have a similar but much lesser problem, because for the most part, they look much better than the suits do. The biggest issue is trying to piece together what kind of chimeric mastodon Zack is sporting. It doesn't look like much of anything, honestly. Also on the topic of Zords, they really should have shown how the Zords combine instead of blinding us during the process. It doesn't look cool this way. It looks like they ran out of budget, or worse, refused to take the time to film it properly. This would have worked fine if we had already seen the Megazord come together once or twice. The show does this too, but as a first impression, it undercuts what could have been a much more iconic moment. Also, Zordon as pin art does not work. If you've got Bryan Cranston around, let him be Bryan Cranston. Put him in the tube and let us actually see his expressions, see his emotions. I'm a fan of what they did of Zordon here by giving him a more emotionally nuanced backstory, but being emotionally nuanced does not mix well with this chosen design. If I were Hasbro, the first thing I'd do is clean up the suits. Just pass it off as the Zeo crystals reacting to the morphing grid or something. Easy. I'm not saying they have to be exactly like the original ones, but history has shown us that a willingness to embrace a colorful campiness, at least in artistic direction, resonates a lot better than trying to ground every little tiny minute detail in reality. This isn't a period piece. This isn't winning any Oscars. Trust me, we'll be fine suspending our disbelief for 2 hours and change. In fact, that's why many of us go to the movies at all. Now that we've talked a little bit about aesthetic and design, let's talk about the real meat of the film. Power Rangers as a franchise is built on people coming together, regardless of how different they are or how underprepared for the threat they might be. Time Force nailed this. RPM nailed this. Jungle Fury especially nailed this. It's a big part of the Ranger DNA. Not just the coming together, but the at times arduous path getting there. So, one of the best things the film does is understand that these 5 teenagers can never really be Rangers until that hurdle is cleared. Put another way, they cannot morph into their suits until they earn their suits. And that comes not just from intense training, but also from encouraging each other, making friends of former strangers, standing strong in the face of danger, and of course, learning about each other. I feel like I haven't said this old phrase of mine for a while now, but this is the time to bring it back out. The Power Rangers are people first, and by understanding that, and focusing on the cast as troubled, reluctant, and at times very boneheaded people, the movie proves it understands that powerful idea. None of these kids are Steve Rogers. They didn't exit the womb ready to fight monsters, and that's the point. Because some of the all-time best Rangers are otherwise normal people leaving their pride, their old lives, and all that other baggage at the door because this matters more. And by giving the entire team, including Zordon, some kind of roadblock to clear socially, they not only feel like more complete people, but they come across as on equal footing because of the path they took to become Rangers. This was a story worth telling and worth expanding on, so I'm glad the Power Rangers told it. But now, we have to discuss where this notion falls flat. And a lot of that has to do with one of the movie's defining moments, the death of Billy. A moment that would have been a lot more resonating if there were no trailers telling us that, oh, yeah, they still have to form that big old Megazord thing. I guess Billy has to come back somehow? But even if we didn't see his eventual restoration coming, I'm sorry to say that this moment still doesn't work exactly as intended, and here's why. As I discussed in length, the Ranger powers here only come once earned, and after weeks of training and camaraderie, the team was well on their way. Unfortunately, Rita gets the drop on Trini, and they're forced to fight her before their powers manifest, thus leading to Billy dying. This tragic event forces the team to come together through their shared pain, thus opening up the morphing grid, bringing Billy back, it's morphin' time, action sequence, save the day. Here's where the problem lies, however. The reason Power of Pink crushed a Lost Galaxy team that was used to sacrifices was because this was the sacrifice. Kendrix was the glue of the team, and she was being forcibly yanked away. This worked because in my endless praise for my favorite Ranger ever, I always highlight how she formed bonds with everyone on her team. In my mind, Billy as a character was clearly made to undertake a similar kind of role, especially with as lovable and as genuine as he is. But he never really did beyond his friendship with Jason. Their connection was the most pivotal character dynamic in the movie by a country mile. However, nobody else came anywhere close to having a noteworthy bond or moment with Billy. Trini and Kim had a thing. Kim and Jason had a thing. Zach and Trini had a thing. Even Jason and Zach had a bit of a rivalry thing. Everybody had things, more than one thing. But not Billy. He only really had Jason as a thing. Not even Zordon, who ultimately saves him, was a thing. All it would have taken to elevate that pivotal moment is for Billy to share one scene apiece, just one, with each Ranger. It would probably make the movie longer, but it'd be worth the length. Remember how Zach doesn't go to school too much? Maybe Billy helps. Remember how Trini has parental issues? Maybe Billy gives her perspective because he lost his dad. Simple things, but potentially great scenes. Scenes that last maybe a few minutes apiece, all of which make the loss of Billy hurt a lot more. But because these things don't happen, it ultimately struck me as far-fetched to have Zach be willing to die for anyone in this room. When Jason says it, I do believe it, because for the most part, he did fine as the leader of the team. But with Zach, maybe Trini, but he barely talked to Kim. The characters themselves all got to shine in unique ways, but if you're going to focus on a narrative where the character bonds also need to matter, then make them matter. The idea was great, and the execution was almost there, but it just missed the mark. And cleaning up how all of that was presented and structured would have turned this into a much better film. But that's not to say that they still can't do all of that, although it would need to be framed differently moving forward. So now let's segue a bit and talk more fully about a few possible sequel directions and how they can make that better than the original. First things first, the way the team develops as people matters. We know this, so keep emphasizing that. Jason wasn't pushed too much as a leader by his team outside of Zordon not having too much faith in him that one time. So a good place to go with him would be him trying his best to lead the team while also trying to balance that with still being just another kid as well as their friend. Maybe, just maybe, not being able to find that balance was a problem back in his football days too. So, perfect chance for parallels, and probably a good idea to make sure his dad is involved and sees just how much he's trying to grow, trying to leave the past behind. Fairly simple narrative, but a perfect one for this version of Jason. Also, this version of Jason has a little sister, so use the element of cuteness. No, I'm serious, use it. It worked really well in both Ant-Man movies. And then, maybe parlay his leadership struggles with the fact that this new kid on the block is making a very positive impression on his team. For this to work, and probably for the sequel to work at all, they really need to hit a home run with the Tommy casting. I've seen a few names floating around, but honestly, all the people I think might do really well are a little too old for the part. If there's a young, up-and-coming Chris Evans-like actor out there, that's who I'd go with. Someone who can mix charm and charisma with an unapologetic need to do the right thing, inspired by the fact that he'd likely be Green of Evil in this version too. What I think would be interesting is to have Tommy's evil be framed as a ploy to bait the Rangers not named Jason into trusting him. Seems like a clever way to take them out of commission. Almost too clever for one Rita Repulsa, and at some point, yes, Lord Zed is revealed as the one actually pulling the strings now, but that's more of an endgame reveal. Also important, make it so Tommy chooses to become the evil Green Ranger. I think one of the biggest things this movie has to get right is the Jason-Tommy dynamic, a dynamic that will naturally be combative at first, but then, after Tommy nearly obliterates all of them, all 6 Rangers come together with the shared understanding that they've all made mistakes, done things they aren't proud of. But if the first 5 of them could turn it around and fight for something bigger than themselves, so too can Tommy. So Tommy eventually agrees to do just that, making this Tommy less JDF adjacent and more like the repentance-driven Merrick. That's the main reason why I'd have Tommy's evil arc be a choice, because that would give him a lot more in common with his new team. That said, there are a few things I would not change at all. The iconic "Will you join us, Tommy?" with outstretched hand. The path getting there would of course be different, but I think they'd be crazy to not copy that specific scene almost verbatim before the final showdown. And also, the Dragon Sword is perfect as is. If you're going to modernize it, at least keep its trademark bulky Godzilla-like design. Slimming it down would only risk drawing comparisons to that other, much lesser Godzilla. And I suppose we also have to mention the whole thing with Tommy potentially being female. Look, we are all well aware that in this day and age, certain moronic subsections of humanity will lose their minds at the mere mention of this, at the mere thought of this. For the love of God, let's not be that fan base, please. That said, I don't see gender flipping Tommy as a good idea. There already weren't enough fans who would get behind the first team, so I highly doubt that straying further away from the source material in this instance would be well received. Taking measured risks is something Hasbro should think about accomplishing through Beast Morphers and any other future seasons. That's where things have gotten stale, and that's where a fresh new perspective is most needed. So, those are just a few of my thoughts. Look forward to reading yours. By the way, if any Hasbro people are watching, feel free to draw inspiration from this video if anything piques your interest. In short, the 2017 movie built a strong foundation that the sequel can continue to work with. But there's also a few key problem areas that in all likelihood held back the first movie from being a bigger success on multiple fronts. None of this will be easy, but it'll be much more doable than making people forget about Michael Bay. You can keep that powerful purpose while also making the movie feel like the more colorful superheroes that people fell in love with back in the day. Wonder Woman did that, Marvel keeps doing it, and Sony used to be able to do it. Power Rangers is by far the youngest of these signature brands, and we've got a lot of work to do to someday be as noteworthy. But we can do it. I strongly believe that. We're not as far off as some might think, and one great movie can completely flip the narrative of the last 6 or so years. But this won't help. Fix this first. But don't worry, we'll talk plenty about how our Hasbro overlords can right this ship once we have a bit more information on Beast Morphers. And until then, thanks for watching.